The Humiliated Father IV, Part 2 of 4. The other theory of transference is the one that puts the emphasis on this, which is no less irreducible and is just as evidently true, that the analyst as subject is an interested party in the transference. It is clearly in this version that this emphasis is made, in the other mode of thinking about the transference, on the therapeutic alliance. There is a real internal coherence between this and what accompanies it, what correlates to it with the analyst, this mode of conceiving the transference, which is the second one, the one in relation to which I pinpointed Anna Freud, whose way of indicating it is, in fact, not bad, but she is not the only one that puts the accent on the ego's powers. It is not simply a question of recognizing them objectively, it is a question of the place they are given in therapeutic practice. And what are you told here? It's that there is a whole initial part of the treatment in which there is not even any question of speaking, of thinking, of bringing into play what is correctly speaking the unconscious realm. To begin with, you only have defences. That is the least that can be said of it. And this goes on for a good long time. This is something that becomes nuanced more through practice than through what is taught, and it is to be sensed laterally to the theory that is made about it. It is not quite the same thing putting the importance of the defences at the forefront, something that is oh so well founded, as ending up theorising things right up to making the ego itself a kind of inert mass that can even be conceived, and this is exactly what the school of Chris, Hartman and the others does, as comporting, after all let's say it, elements that are in the end irreducible, uninterpretable for us. This is what they end up with, and this is clear. I am not making them say it, they say it. And the next step is that after all it really is thus, and that we should even make this ego more irreducible, adding defences to it. After all, this is one conceivable mode in which psychoanalysis can be carried out. I am not at all, at the moment, even implying any connotation of judgment or rejection. That's how it is. Anyway, what can be said is that, compared with what the other version formulates, it does not seem that this side here is the more Freudian. That's the least that can be said. But we have something else, don't we, on our agenda today, this year, than going over again the connotations of this eccentricity to which I gave, in the first years of my teaching, such importance. It has been seen as having some polemical intention, whereas I can assure you that this is far from my thinking. But what it is about is changing the level of adjustment of our thinking. Things are not quite the same now, but these deviations took on a truly fascinating significance in the psychoanalytic community, which went right up to taking away any sense of them being questions. A certain perspective restored, bringing back to light a certain inspiration, thanks to something that is nothing more than a restoration of the psychoanalytic idiom, langue, I mean its structure, of what it brought out at the beginning in Freud, that the situation is different. And just the fact, even for those that may feel a bit lost by the fact that we are going into an area in my seminar with all pomp and ceremony on the basis of Claudel's work, that they nevertheless have the feeling that this has the closest possible relationship with the transference, very much proves by itself that something has sufficiently changed, that there is no longer any need to insist on the negative aspect of this or that tendency. It is not the negative sides that interest us, but the positive sides, those that can be used just as well by us and at the point where we are as constructive elements. So why is it useful to us, what I would call, as an example, in shorthand, this Claudelian mythology. It's amusing, I have to tell you, that I was surprised myself when I recently reread a thing that I had never reread previously, as it was published uncorrected. It was Jean Val who did that when I was giving little open presentations at Philosophy College. It was something on obsessional neurosis that I don't remember the title of, the neurotics myth, I think. As you can see, we are already at the heart of the question. The neurotics myth, in which, in relation to the rat man, I showed the function of mythical structures in determining symptoms. As it was still to be corrected, I thought the thing to be useless. With time gone by, bizarrely, I reread it without too much discontent, and I was surprised to see there, you could have chopped my head off, I would not have believed it, that I spoke there about the humiliated father. There must be a reason for these things. Anyway, it is not just because I encountered the capital U with a circumflex accent that I am speaking to you about it. So, let's resume. What does the analysand come looking for? He comes looking for what there is to be found, or more precisely, if he is searching, it is because there is something to be found. And the only thing that there is to be found, correctly speaking, is the trope par excellence, the trope of tropes, what is called his destiny. If we forget that there is a certain relationship between the analyst and this sort of thing, that is in the order of the figure, in the sense that the word figure can be used to say a figure of destiny, just as one also says a figure of speech, and that it is for this that psychoanalysis has not even been able to make one step forward without the myth emerging. Forgetting this would mean that one is simply forgetting one's origins. It is possible that in parallel, in the evolution of psychoanalysis itself, there has been a kind of sliding that is a factor in a practice that is always more forceful, always more pregnant, exacting in the results required, so that hence the evolution of psychoanalysis has risked making us forget the importance, the weight of this formulation of myths, the origin of myth. Luckily, elsewhere there has continued to be much interest in it, in such a way that it exists as a detour, something that perhaps comes back to us more legitimately than we think. Perhaps we can take credit for this interest in the function of the myth. I have made allusion to it, more than illusion, I have been articulating it for a long time, since the first pre-seminar working group. The seminar had, all the same, already started. There were people who came and did it with me at my place, on the Rat Man. It is already the functioning, the bringing into play, of the structural articulation of the myth, such as it has been applied since, and in an ongoing, systematic, developed way, by Lévi-Strauss, for example, in his own seminar, of which I have already tried to show you the value, the function, to explain what happens in the Rat Man's story. For those who have overlooked things or don't know them, the structuralist articulation of the myth is something that takes the myth as a whole, I mean the epos, the story, the way it gets told from beginning to end, in order to construct a kind of model that is uniquely constituted by a series of connoted oppositions, within the myth itself, of the functions concerned within the myth, for example in the myth of Oedipus, the father-son relationship, the incest. I am giving you a schematic account, of course. I am reducing what it is about for you. It can be noticed that the myth does not stop there, i.e., that in the next generation, if it is a myth, this term of generation cannot be conceived as simply the procession of characters that there always has to be. When the old ones fall, there are the little ones who return so that it all starts again. There is a significant coherence in what is produced in the constellation that follows the first constellation, and it is this coherence that is of interest to us. Something happens, whatever you wish, that will have a connotation, enemy brothers. Then, on the other hand, the function of a transcendent love that goes against the law, like incest, but manifestly located in opposition within its function, in any case that we can define by a certain number of oppositional terms in relation to the figure of incest. In short, I am going through what happens in Antigone. It's a game in which it is exactly a question of detecting what the rules are that give it its rigour. And take note that there is no conceivable rigour other than the one that is exactly established in the game. In short, what the mythic function allows us in this game in which the transformations operate according to certain rules and that, as a result of this fact, can be found to have a revelatory value, creating superior configurations from particularly illuminating cases, for example, in short, of showing this same kind of fecundity that belongs to mathematics. That is what is at stake in the elucidation of myths. And this concerns us in the most direct way, since it would be impossible to tackle the subject that we have to deal with in psychoanalysis without encountering these mythic functions. This is a fact proven by experience. In any case, it is right from the first steps taken in psychoanalysis that Freud bases what he is saying on this reference to the myth, right from the interpretation of dreams and the letters to Fleiss, the myth of Oedipus. It cannot be that we neglect it, that we put it in parenthesis, that we try to express everything to articulate our whole practice in the economic mode, as one says. The function, for example, of conflict between primal tendencies taken in its most radical form, of all defences against articulation connoting an emphasis on the topic of the ego, in the thesis of the narcissistic function of the ideal ego, of a certain id. It cannot but be that going in this direction, and losing the other pole of reference, represents, correctly speaking, what in our practice should be noted as, correctly speaking in the positive sense that it has for us, a forgetting. That does not stop ongoing practice from being able to be psychoanalytic practice. It's an analytic practice that forgets its own terms of reference.